Hello, hello, I'm Sinner, and I'm back with another episode of Leviathan Times, Chapter 5 at this time. Um, the title of this article is The Proletariat is Psychologically Servile. Now, basically, what this is about is the fact that socialist organizations, um, the working class, these people, they don't, what they advocate for allegedly is rights, but in reality, what they're advocating for is privileges. They're advocating for things like higher wages, maternity leave, retirement benefits, subsidized health care, so on and so forth. These things are never rights, they're privileges. And what makes them a privilege, not a right? A right is something that's sort of inherent and immutable about yourself. Now, I personally don't even believe in rights, but let's pretend that I do for a second. They only make sense if they're immutable characteristics, like in a deontological sense. Um, but healthcare, paid maternity leave, workplace compensation for injuries, these things are things that are given to you. They're given to you. They're not some immutable characteristic of yourself. So they have to come from somewhere. And where they come from all the time is the state. And if it's not the state, it's a big corporation. Now, which means either way, it's a big external authority that is granting you the privilege of whatever it is, whatever regulation it is, whatever like advantage you might get, material advantage you might get. It's always top down. So how is this to do with anything? Like, how does this make proletariat psychologically servile? How does that make sense? Well, the reason it's that way is because the relationship between the proletariat and the 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 ruling class, let's say, never changes. It's always the same. You're always demanding grants, essentially, from above. And as a matter of fact, what it does is it reinforces that power dynamic because now you're not only reliant on the status quo, the regime, let's say, for your wage, you're now also reliant on them for like your pension, your retirement. You're reliant on them for your healthcare. You're reliant on them for your, you know, paid maternity leave or your workplace compensation or to uh, uphold high standards for whatever business you engage with in day-to-day life, whether it's for food or for um, I don't know, building a house, there's obviously legal standards for how a house has to be built. So every time that regulation occurs in a in the Western society, it's always from the state or via the state with a big corporation taking the helm. And that's giving away freedom and autonomy to something higher up, right? And you got to think about this mindset because if something bad happens in society, right? Think about it for a moment. Anytime something bad happens, no one ever goes, us the people need to have more power so we can control our, our safety, our health, or whatever it is. They always make the same appeal. We need more government regulation. The state needs to intervene. The daddy needs to come rescue me, basically, is what it is. Big daddy needs to come rescue me. And it's this is federal law all the way down to local law. Local law is the worst in a lot of cases. So there's no sense of stewardship or independence or uh, autonomy. It's always a a desire, a reflexive, like knee-jerk reaction desire to be managed and controlled every time something bad happens. Um, and this is not a thing that sort of people misinterpret when they hear this sort of stuff, because it's kind of like an anarchist type talking point in a way. Is they think like, oh, so you're against regulation. You think it should be just like bedlam or something like this. No, no, that's not what I think. Hello? There we go. It's not what I think. It's that you don't need the state to regulate everything. The state can be not involved and regulation can still exist. So and that it would be better in certain circumstances if it was voluntary regulation. So, cooperatives, mutual aid societies, unions, guild, voluntary worker associations, you know, there are things that have existed or do exist that allow for regulation to happen in a voluntary way and in a way that's more scalable. And we'll get onto that point later of like scalable regulation and why that's important. Um, but yeah, the idea is you don't need. Actually, we'll get onto it now. So, why is scalable regulation important? It's because, believe it or not, the current setup, the current status quo, big companies actually have an advantage to over-regulating things. Now, this doesn't really make a lot of sense on a basic level, but it's to do with the fact that um, uh, big companies, due to their corporate structure, have the ability to deal with red tape a lot easier than small, independent local companies. So, if I am a big company, and I'm mass producing products, I can afford to have a lot of really specific rules in place because I'm producing a billion, gajillion products every year, and my over, like my percentage profit doesn't need to be as big in order for me to make a lot of money, right? But if you have a small company, um, one, there's less division of labor. So that, let's say it's like a one-man show, right? If I'm a winemaker, let's say, and I'm producing wine all by myself, it's now going to be, instead of like there being a team that cleans everything, a team that makes sure everything's up to standard, it's now just one guy who's doing everything. So that division of labor sort of expenses is present when it otherwise doesn't really. It still exists, but it's not as big a deal for a big company. And this allows for um, big companies to avoid competition because it makes the cost of entering into a market higher. So I could never, like, legally speaking, produce a bunch of wine at home in my backyard, uh, in a I don't know, in a cellar underground and sell it, because the amount of legal loops and regulations I would have to jump through and adhere to and get and this and that. By the time I did all that, I would have no money, so I wouldn't be able to do it. But a big company can do it because they have all that money to like get through all the red tape. So the red tape acts as a way to stifle competition, and that's why it's a lot of this sort of stuff about independent regulation is important because it allows there to be more competition, and competition, real competition, is a good thing. Um, Not to say that big companies never do anything wrong. They do a lot of things wrong. They're very bad. But yeah, those are the main things. Now, on councils, this was the other thing I wanted to say is when a lot of the regulation stops being voluntary, it ends up being coercive. Um, and that can be coercive to a degree that is frankly stupid. Now, if you, obviously like I'm not against a little bit of coercion. That sounds like bad, but you know, sometimes the state is right and you're wrong. Sorry. Sometimes you shouldn't be allowed to just do things. You shouldn't be allowed to just sell meth. I'm sorry. You shouldn't. Um, but you know, for example, in my city where I live, there's a council on the southern end of the city where if you build a shed without council approval, the fine can be up to $10,000, which is just ridiculous. Um, Now, there's a lot of other things like people needing council approval to cut down trees. But at the same time, if you don't cut down certain trees or trim back certain trees, you get a fine. And there's all these other uh, things that sort of get in the way, um, where it becomes really hard to get a lot of things done. Oh, you can't build a business here because you're in the wrong zoning area, or you can't build a second story. You can't do this, you can't do that. The council says this, the council says that. It's a very like top down, standardized, uniformistic uh, regulation that makes life harder rather than easier, causes more problems than it solves. So yeah, that's all I really wanted to say. I am Senna. Please like and subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.